There were 80 attempts, at least, on Lincoln's life during the Civil War before he was finally assassinated 5 days after Lee had accepted surrender terms to Grant on April 9th, 1865. So there was very little time for his elation of the victory of pulling the Union back together, literally, after the Civil War. During this period of time that he was serenaded at the White House, then known as the Executive Mansion, and somebody who had a band there asked if Lincoln wanted to hear any music, and he said, "Yeah, I'd like to have you play Dixie," which they did, and they were kind of surprised that he requested that, and he says, "Well, we've rightfully won it, and they're part of our nation. We've got to heal up the wounds," and so on, which he talked about in his second inaugural speech. But as we know, at his second inaugural, in a famous photograph that's now been enhanced of that great speech he gave about binding up the nation's wounds and bringing the country together right before the war ended. John Wilkes Booth and some of his co-conspirators are in the picture. In fact, Booth is up in the upper right-hand part of the famous photograph, claimed later in his diary that he could have taken out the president if he wanted to at the second inaugural. Booth's original plan was to kidnap the president. That would have been easy to do at the time because we had no Secret Service. Occasionally they'd have a military man that would be watching the president, be around him. It seems amazing to me that the capitals of the Confederacy and the Union were around 100 miles apart, and they had very little protection for the President of the United States. Lincoln was noted for wanting to go out on carriage rides with his wife Mary or by himself on horseback rides on Sunday afternoons. And one Sunday afternoon when he went out, a bullet whizzed through his famous stovepipe hat that he was wearing, and he headed back to the White House after that. And it was known that there was somebody that was trying to shoot him. More serious was Booth's determination, rather than to capture him and to take him and try to get prisoners and so on in return for him, to the Union to assassinate him. And at Mary Surratt's boarding house, the group met for several weeks in which they determined that Booth would take out the president and other members would take out Vice President Andrew Johnson and Secretary of State William H. Seward. The fellow that was supposed to take out the vice president chickened out at the last minute and never attempted him. But the one that was sent over to the Secretary of State's office actually busted his way into the Secretary of State's home. He was in bed due to an accident he'd had with a wagon, and attacked his son, Seward's son, and him, nearly cutting his throat with a knife. It's amazing that Seward survived, but he did. Lincoln, as we know, wasn't so fortunate. He went to the theater, saw Our American Cousin, and during one scene of the theater, Booth, who had already planned out where he was going to shoot the president up in his box, shot him with a Derringer, just very close to the back of his head, behind his ear, as he sat with Mrs. Lincoln. It's interesting that General Grant was invited to that theater that night, but couldn't make it. Major Rathbone went and was supposed to be a guard there. The main guard of Lincoln's was supposed to be outside the door, went to the tavern next door, and there's always been some concern that maybe he was part of the conspiracy, but early on that was determined that he just left his post and shouldn't have done. Booth was jumped, as we know, from the president's box, caught his foot on a presidential flag, which was torn, broke his leg, and then waddled off the stage, yelling "Sic semper tyrannis," death to tyrants, and then made his way out of Washington before people realized that our first president ever had been assassinated. Finally, the city was put on alert. Secretary of War Stanton took complete charge of the government. There was a lot of military around at the time anyway, and they cut off all the bridges and escape routes. Unfortunately, Booth had already made it out of the city by the time they took these measures. And the president was very carefully carried, mortally wounded, across the street to the Peterson House, where he expired the next morning at 7:20 a.m. These are examples that I'm holding in my hand of both the hair of Abraham Lincoln, the hair of William H. Seward, and part of the sheet, the bloody sheet, which was behind Lincoln's head at the time during the night before he passed away the following morning, April 15th, 1865. The country was thrown into terrible mourning. This man that had been hated by half the country was now idolized as having died on Good Friday, and the portents, the connection with the Savior's life and death, were immediately attributed to this good man Lincoln. He became, over time, of course, the saint at Lincoln. Everybody was draped in black for a long period of time. There were 11 funerals held on Lincoln, so many so that professional mortuary sciences was pretty well developed off of keeping Lincoln's body looking good during the 11 stops on the way home to Springfield. People tried to get Mary Todd to bury him in Washington or to bury him in Chicago, a more major city than their hometown of Springfield. Mary Lincoln resisted that and wanted their son Willie, whose body was taken on the same train back across the country, to be buried next to their first son, Eddie, who had died before he was elected president, in Springfield. And that's where he rests to this day.